In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to build the best $750 gaming PC build for 2022, featuring Nvidia's latest and greatest RTX 3050, our favourite budget GPU ever. This build is perfectly equipped for 1080p high frame rate gaming without breaking the bank. Let's do this. The Corsair iQ5000T provides the ultimate in airflow, RGB lighting and mounting compatibility for PC builds in 2022. With 3 alloy fans included, 160 addressable RGB lights in the front, roof and floor panels, Corsair have really taken things up a notch. Learn more about the awesome 5000T in our build videos over on the channel or at the where to buy links in the description below. Let's kick things off by taking a look at the motherboard and CPU choice first. These are two components we can tick off nice and early and really pave the way for the rest of the build. Here we've got an MSI B550M PRO-VDH and an AMD Ryzen 5 3600X. Our CPU has 6 cores, 12 threads, supports overclocking, and gives us plenty of performance for the 3050. With it being a Ryzen 3000 chip, it's also slightly older than the newer 5600X, saving us lots of money, but still avoiding bottlenecks. It's a great chip for this build and works with the latest AMD B550 motherboards. Speaking of which, this MSI board is my favourite B550 board that exists. There's a few really key reasons for this. The first is that you get an included Gen 4 NVMe slot for the latest superfast SSDs. You get 4 RAM DIMMs for dual channel performance now, and then another 2 DIMMs later on, perfect for future upgrades. And if you look on the rear panel, you've got a generous helping of USB 3 ports. No USB-C on the rear panel of the motherboard, but you do get a USB-C connection on the front panel, still enabling you access to those next-gen storage standards. To install our Ryzen 5 chip, we're going to pull up the arm on the CPU socket. You'll see the socket shift very slightly when you do this, and then we can drop the processor in. Line up the gold triangle on the CPU with that of the plastic triangle on the motherboard, and you're sure to have the CPU oriented in the right way. Before we move on to the next components, the RAM and the SSD, we need to look at cooling. No CPU can just lie there sitting bare, because before you know it, it's just going to explode, and nobody wants that. What we're going to do is we're going to stick with AMD's included stock cooler. You'll find this included for free with your CPU, and it actually does a really good job of keeping the chip cool. Check out these temperature results from the benchmark section later on. It shows that an expensive cooler is not necessarily always required. Of course, this will be louder than an all-in-one liquid cooler or a tower cooler like the Cooler Master Hyper 212 Evo, but it still saves you money, saving you $40 to $70 for this build. Crucial in getting things down as cheap as possible. This will come with pre-applied thermal paste if it's brand new, but if you go in used, add on a drop of your own and then screw the cooler in. Plug in the fan to the top CPU fan header and your CPU and CPU cooler installation is nicely complete. The next step is to move on to the RAM or the memory, and for this build a 16GB kit of Corsair's Vengeance RGB is going to work well. They've got different variations with the RS, RT, Pro, but fundamentally a DDR4 16GB kit comprised of 2 DIMMs with a 3600MHz clock speed is all you need. Simply locate the RAM DIMMs on your motherboard and pull back the retention clips on both sides of the 2nd and 4th slots, working outwards from the CPU. If you've got this right, your NDIMM slot should be open. We're then going to slide the RAM into place with the gold notch sliding into the black plastic slot, and we're going to repeat this for as many DIMMs as we've got. The Vengeance tech should then face outwards away from your motherboard, and that's pretty much it. To wrap up the work we need to complete on the motherboard assembly, we're next going to install this, our M.2 storage. Now for this stage, you'll want to grab yourself a teeny tiny screwdriver and locate this small retention screw that comes pre-installed onto the motherboard. Take this out, as that will then give you room to install the M.2 drive. Our choice for this build, Seagate's BarraCuda 510. You can pick up a 1TB drive for a shave over $100, plus, or a 500 gig drive for more like 60-65. Latest pricing and availability though can be found in the description below, as these things are always changing about, so it's best to double check. Slide the drive in, fasten it down, and that's basically all there is to it. Our M.2 drive is now sitting nice and comfortably, and we're ready for the next stage of the build. That next stage includes installing the motherboard into the case for this system. Now, picking the right case for your gaming PC is really difficult. There's so many options on the market. Each look different colour schemes, different fan layouts, different amounts of RGB, and the TD300 mesh is my choice today. It's one of Cooler Master's budget options that takes the TD500 mesh, a case I personally love, and shrinks it right down. With room for two 120mm RGB fans at the front that come included, a tempered glass side panel, and a power supply shield, it does just about everything that we're after. What we need to do at this stage is actually grab the case itself and take time to remove as many of the side panels as possible. That includes this front tempered glass side panel, which slides off a little something like so, and then of course the rear steel side panel too. It's got a little handle to slide off and out of the way. I'm going to lay the case down flat for this stage, as it makes installing the motherboard generally a lot easier. Before going all gung-ho and sliding the motherboard into place, first you need to locate yourself one of these. This is the rear I/O shield that comes included in your motherboard's box, and it's going to clip in into this rectangle at the rear of the chassis. Be careful because these can be sharp, but what it will do is create all of the right cutouts in all of the right places. Different motherboards have different I/O configs, and getting the right ports is quite important. What we then need to do is take the motherboard itself and locate each of the holes through the rear. So you can see here we've got 3 at the top, a further 3 along the middle, and then 2 on the bottom at slightly different levels. We need to ensure that these line up with the pre-installed standoffs in the case. If they don't, or we've got extras, we could see the motherboard grounding out, and that can cause some serious damage. If we take a cursory glance, you can see the 3 at the top are all in the right places, 3 along the middle also look good, and then the 2 along the bottom are a-okay. Just be careful that you haven't got one installed here rather than here. Remember, the ones at the bottom are at different levels. This is something that's really important to get right. Slide your motherboard into place with the I/O going through the rear I/O shield and the board sitting on top of those standoffs. Fasten each one with an included motherboard screw that comes with our TD300 mesh case, and once that's done, the motherboard and the case are all nicely wrapped up. While we're here and the case is laid down flat, I'm also going to go ahead and pop in the GPU, because believe it or not, doing this when the case is on a table is actually a lot easier than when it's upright. This right here is MSI's RTX 3050 Gaming X, with a quite high-end 2-fan design, RGB, a nice metal backplate, and all in all a good package for Nvidia's 3050. It's an awesome option. We've looked at the Asus Strix card previously, and we'll soon be taking a peek at their dual design too, so it'll be interesting to see how this 2-fan cooler stacks up against the competition. Pretty much any title you throw at this card, it can handle at 1080p, high settings, 60 FPS or above, and there's not much more you can ask for in a $750 build. Plus, with 8GB of GDDR6 video memory, you get double what you would achieve on an AMD RX 6500 XT, putting this card markedly above any of its current competition. Great work, Nvidia. In this case, the rear PCI covers are already removed, so it's simply a case of pushing back the retention clip and sliding the card into place. It will install with a satisfying click sound, and then we can fasten it down with a couple of the same screws we used to actually pop our motherboard into place. I think the GPU is already looking really great in this build. It's a nice size for the case. There's still room for like a liquid cooler at the front if you wanted, yet it doesn't feel too small. It doesn't feel lost in our TD300 mesh either. Now we're nearly at the end, believe it or not. We've just got one more thing to do to round off the build portion of today's video, and it's probably the most tricky part of the process, so bear with me and I'm going to guide you through it step by step. It is, of course, none other than installing the power supply. For this system, a 500 watt unit is going to be enough, and that's where this Cooler Master MWE 500 comes in. Now, unfortunately, this power supply isn't modular, which is completely fine, because with plenty of cable management room and the requirement anyway for motherboard, CPU, SATA, and GPU power connections, should we have had a semi-modular unit, we'd have ended up plugging most of the cables in anyway. Perhaps more importantly though, it comes with these sleeved all-black cables, which look really sleek and far better than some of the other disgusting options you get with some cheaper power supplies, naming no names. I'm going to go ahead and screw the power supply into the rear of the case, and then plug up our motherboard, CPU, and GPU power connections. First up is the motherboard. This is the largest 24-pin cable, and goes to the right-hand side of the board. A CPU power connection is next up. This is the 4+4-pin 8-pin cable, which goes to the very top left. Above, of course, our processor. I'm also going to pop in our 6+2-pin GPU power connection to, of course, the graphics card. Finally, a SATA power connection, which we typically use for old-style SSDs and traditional hard drives, is going to be used to power up the RGB hub. But that's not quite it on the cables and wiring front. To finish things off for good this time, we need to pop in our front panel cables, which are comprised of our headphone and mic jack, known as a HD audio connector that goes to the bottom left of the motherboard, USB 3.0, which is quite large, notch, and only goes in one way round, up to the right hand side of our motherboard today, and then finally our JFP1 connections. These are the fiddly pins for the power, reset, hard drive indicator LEDs, and go to the bottom right corner. We'll pop a diagram on your screen now, but don't worry if you get these the wrong way round. Nothing will explode, your system just might not turn on for the first time. And with that, that pretty much wraps it up for the build portion of the video. Next up, we're going to see just how this little beast performs when it comes to playing the latest AAA titles at 1080p, but first, let's see how good it looks when it's all powered up in our typical style with a great GeekaWhat montage. I'll see you in a few, but first, roll that montage.
They're taking shots! Target is hot.
Looking good. So we've established that this PC looks visually pretty great, but do the performance numbers stack up as we would like? The short answer is yes. The long answer is I'm going to run you through loads of games right now. Let's start off by looking at a summary of all the results we got. Tested everything from GTA 5 and Battlefield 2042 to Forza Horizon 5 and Fortnite. Here you can also see some temperature data we gathered from both the CPU and the GPU. The GPU maxing out at 56 and CPU maxing out at 72. We're going to take a closer look title by title and kick things off with Battlefield 2042 at 1080p high settings. Here we enabled Nvidia's DLSS, their AI-backed resolution scaler, to give us even better frame rate, and got over 110 frames per second, with 105 and 89 for the 90 and 99th percentiles. As usual, all of our frame rate numbers were tested with both Nvidia FrameView and MSI Afterburner's Riva Tuner for maximum fairness. In COD Vanguard, we once again tested at 1080p high with DLSS enabled. Here we got 130 frames per second, which is a ridiculous number for high settings out of an entry-level GPU, for goodness sake, with solid 90 and 99th percentile results too. Forza Horizon 5 was next up, and here the results were pretty good, on par with our other games so far. Just shy of 100 FPS at 1080p using the high settings preset in the game's inbuilt benchmarking mode. Nearly 100 frames in a racing game is more than enough, and no more frame rate in this title is going to make you any more competitive. It's those first-person shooters where frame rate really counts. We also tried the new Halo Infinite, here at 1080p high settings, and this time pulled in 95 frames per second. I'm going to start calling the 3050 the nearly 100 FPS king, as at 1080p high across the board, that's where the card seems to be giving us the results. Apex Legends is next up, and here once again the results are a similar vein. 1080p high, we got 120 frames per second. 107 and 94 were consistent for the 90 and 99th percentiles, and I was pleased with visually how great Apex looked. We also of course tested out Valorant, a game that's quite easy to run but still worth a look. 1080p high settings here gave us far more than 100 FPS this time. In fact, it gave us nearly 400 frames per second. 392 FPS to be precise in Valorant is a ridiculous result, and one safe to say that I was very, very pleased with. Finally, to wrap things up, we also tested out Fortnite at 1080p competitive settings this time. This is where you tune all the visual fidelity down to low and set the render distance to far for maximum performance and maximum viewing distance. We didn't get 100 FPS, we got 200 FPS here, 204 to be precise. These frame rate results were incredible in Fortnite, and we're sure to make sure you've got that competitive edge when playing Fortnite with the 3050. I've been so impressed with this little two-fan 3050 design design from MSI. It shows you don't have to break the bank to buy a 3050 that delivers really great performance levels. And on that note, that wraps it up for this one. If you enjoyed, make sure to get subscribed to see more from us. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, we'll see you next time.